do know is that Americans hate this economy. 64% of Americans believe the U.S. economy is currently in a recession.
It's pretty tough out here for the prices, yeah. I bought some pickles yesterday at the grocery store, and they were $5. I was in shock.
It's gone. It's depleted. No savings. That's it.
Americans are angry. They're disappointed. And they are worried about the future of this country. Just 21% of adults say we are heading in the right direction. And once again, 3 out of 4 Americans say we are on the wrong track.
You go in and spend $50 and you got like 5 things in the cart. You say, what happened to my money? Where's the food?
I can tell from having the same budget that I had before all of this, I would get less. It seemed like the bags would get smaller and smaller every time.
Yesterday was the first time I ever filled my truck up and I hit over $1,000.
Never before in our poll has this wrong track number been over 70% for this long.
Almost overnight, we saw a 30% increase in our costs.
It forced us, after 30 years, to change the way we run the business.
I'm gonna stop driving. I have to find some other means of getting around.
Lunchables, they used to be like $1 and some change. Now they're almost $3. I sold my car and I had to budget off to add that to the grocery budget.
Drivers parked along a busy Dallas road. They're waiting for food.
Unfortunately, it's worse than a couple of years ago. We are serving now at higher levels than we even did at the peak of the pandemic.
Not even 1 in 4 Americans approve of how Joe Biden's handling the cost of living.
We've gone through our retirement savings more quickly than we had anticipated.
I have 3 kids, and since everything is really expensive. I used to buy 5 of those for $1, now $2 for the same thing and it's smaller.
Hello, America. Your mood may not improve much in the next hour because we're going to tell you the truth. If you're around my age, you probably remember Jimmy Carter and his administration. It was great. Gas lines, inflation, radical environmentalism, massive distrust in the government, a conflict with a volatile Iran. Well, it's almost as if the Biden administration took the blueprints for one of the worst presidencies in U.S. history and said, I can do worse than that. Rather than learning from the terrible policy over the last 2 years and changing course, the Biden White House is doubling down on what we believe are mistakes. I'm not sure they are. It depends what your goal is. President Biden is trying to make you think that over 8% inflation is a good thing, holding steady from month to month. Yeah, no. You know the left-wing policies are not working because you feel it in your bank account every time you buy food or gas. I was at the grocery store, paid over $7 for a gallon of milk. I mean, it was organic, which I don't know why I'm buying organic. Anyway, Americans have already lost over $9 trillion just from the stock market downturn this year. $9 trillion. Another $3 trillion has been erased from all U.S. retirement accounts. How do you feel? Democrats want you to get used to a lower standard of living. So, what are we headed for? What is the fallout from this economic damage going to look like? And what do you do about it? How do we prepare for the most likely worst case scenario? I mean, I could come up with some bad scenarios, but what's most likely to be our worst case scenario? What's most likely to be our best case scenario? I wanted to bring in a couple of experts tonight to help answer those questions because I have no idea. You know Carol Roth. She's regular appearances on my radio program, former Wall Street investment banker, and the best-selling author of The War on Small Business. Also joining us is Jim Iuorio. He is the markets trader and managing director of TJM Institutional Services. Also a small business owner running a restaurant outside of Chicago. Welcome to both of you guys. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good.
Very optimistic here, Close. You always seem to bring me in so that I can deliver all the good news to people. So really appreciate that.
We had a running bet today, and I have to ask you, my producer said, you have destroyed, she was so optimistic, and you've destroyed her. And I said, no, No, she's always been destroyed by the truth. I just let her say it.
Right. Yeah, no, I've always been an optimist. I think you have to be as an American, but I'm also a realist. And that's what we are allowed to talk about here.
So I don't want doomsday scenarios, and I don't want Sunny Jim scenarios. I want most likely
you won't
scenarios.
Get Sunny Jim scenarios.
Because even our most likely good ain't that good,
no doubt.
Right? Okay. All right, so let's start with you, Carol. What is the most likely bad scenario? Worst case scenario, most likely?
So the Fed is trying to cool inflation, and the reality is they're probably going to put us deeper in a recession by trying to do that. I think,
and that's because higher interest rates slow the economy down, less investment.
Exactly.
And so people lose their jobs.
Yes.
Okay.
My concern is they don't have the right tool set to do that, so they end up putting us in a case where there's both, where we actually have this deep recession and we still have higher inflation. So this deeper stagflationary scenario. And while that's happening in the U.S., we also have a global recession that ends up, putting a little bit more pressure on us, possibly even a global currency crisis if energy prices continue to increase. So it really could.
Well, they're going to increase.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to increase. That's the plan.
Unless demand is destroyed so badly that they don't. So that's the kind of the counter pressure. But I do see this sort of stagflationary scenario where asset prices are hurting. We're still getting inflation, and so there really is no place to hide. Is kind of the most likely worst case scenario.
So can I add on that real quick? Because she said that weren't even looking at it correctly. The inflation is just a simple equation, demand versus supply. And the only thing they even can possibly control is the demand side of it. And the only thing they can do is break it down. So they're trying to destroy the demand side of it. And now they have their focus.
Hang on, can I just, I want to translate trying to destroy the demand side. That means they are trying to put you in a situation where you don't have the money to buy things. That's the only way to stop inflation. You stop chasing those goods because you can't afford them. Am I right?
Oh, you're absolutely right.
And if I could add one more thing to that, and also curtailing business investment, which means that they're not hiring at the level they may be letting people go as well. So it's that 1-2 punch.
Yes, and the labor market, which is still remains strong, they have actually made mention of that, and their desire now to create slack in the labor market, which translated for the people too, means less people with jobs. And they count on this as a good thing too. But I think it needs to be mentioned as well, is that this is intentional stuff. The inflation that was brought about, for 10 years, you can spot different Fed people coming on saying, we need to get this inflation going. And there's a reason for it. The indebtedness of states, the debt levels, the pension obligations that these states had, they look a lot better in an inflationary environment. So
because the money is worth less.
Sure.
So it's easier to pay it off.
Yeah, no doubt.
Right.
Well, can I just give us an example like the state of Illinois, which couldn't possibly have got out of their debt or their pension obligations. Let's rewind the tape 3 years ago. The only thing that could possibly happen is the money was pumped into the system by the federal government, which to the tune, the money supply has gone up 40% in 2.5 years' time. So it's just like they're adding money into the system. So and then Illinois gets money from the federal government to the tune of $200 billion. And everything that's being taxed going around the state, the tax revenues are coming back to the state. So if you looked at it and said, wow, Illinois looks a lot better off than they did 3 years ago, they are financially, and none of us are. So it's just kind of a transfer of
wealth transfer, exactly.
Absolutely, right.
Okay, so worst case scenario for both of you, are we in a stagflation or are we in a depression? Worst case, most likely.
Most likely stagflation.
Most likely stagflation, and I think there's going to be some elements. The Fed and the federal government are working against each other right now. The federal government has passed proposed two inflationary bills just in the last month alone. The Inflation Reduction Act, ironically named, obviously, and then the debt forgiveness. They're doing inflationary things at the same time the Fed is trying to decrease demand. So it's a weird kind of balance we have here, but I think this could go on for a long time, yes.
This is a hard question to ask, or a hard question to hear the answer, and I don't know if you're uncomfortable, fine. you know, I think it was Sherlock Holmes that said when you look at all the possible answers and all of the most logical ones, no matter how crazy it is, if that's the one left, that's the answer. And I feel this is crazy, but I can't come up with another answer on how poorly this is run other than they have different goals than the American people.
This is a big argument I have. Is it incompetence or is it sinister? The level of incompetence that's gone on the whole way makes the incompetence argument very difficult. So, yes, it seems as though they have different goals.
Yeah, so I hate to say this, and this is where I've sort of come around. You know, when I was naive and innocent. I went,
and then you met me.
And now I'm corrupted. You know, I wanted to believe that it was just incompetence. But
I think we all do.
But it is deliberate. And it may not be deliberate with everybody's intention being destroying people, but it's deliberate in terms of gaining power or helping the government spend, which means the only likely outcome is destroying people. So they may be putting the blinders on going, oh, no, that's not really what's going to happen, and lying to themselves. But every step of the way, the policies have been deliberate, and we've called it out. You know, people like myself, people like Jim, people like you are calling out, there's going to be inflation. It's not going to be transitory. I would actually argue that during the period right after the Great Recession financial crisis, when everybody said there was no inflation, there was inflation. It just all happened to be in assets. It was all in the stock market and your house. It wasn't until the stimulus went directly to you and to you that we started seeing it at what they measure as inflation. But there's been a ton of inflation, and it's just been lied about.
Absolutely. Okay. I want to add one dimension in on this, and that is, I mean, I think the pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline incident, has put us in a very bad situation. I think the strategic oil reserve is putting us in a very bad situation. If we go to war, does that trigger something even worse? And I want to start there next. Hang on, just hold on just a sec. Back in a minute. All right, if you're a dog owner, you know that taking care of your pet means more than just giving it food and water. A dog is part of your family. My dog is. Uno, I absolutely love. He's getting so old now. It's so hard. He gets up. He would stay in the bathroom because he liked the tile floor because it was so cool. And he's a German Shepherd, a lot of fur. And he'd get up every morning when I'd get up. He'd get up and he'd walk into the other room where it was dark and he'd go back to sleep. Now he doesn't even get up. He's just like, I hurt too much. I can't get up. Rough Greens has extended his life, the good parts of his life. I'm convinced of it. Rough Greens is something you put on top of your dog's food. It's full of all sorts of vitamins and minerals and probiotics and antioxidants. If it's good for your dog, it's most likely in Rough Greens. And your dog will go crazy for it. I think they add some sort of probably Chinese dog crack. I don't know what's in it, but they love it, and he licks the bowl clean. So try Rough Greens. You can get a free bag of Rough Greens just for your dog to try out. Make sure he eats it. All you pay for is shipping. If he likes it, order the full bag of Rough Greens and watch the difference in your dog. roughgreens.com/Beck or call 833-GLEN-33. Okay, so I want to get into some things that the common man is thinking about, like what do I do? What is my life going to be like? How much is a loaf of bread? In the worst case, most likely worst case scenario. Let me add, does the worst case scenario change if we're at war?
You want to take that first?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly. So there's most likely worst case scenario, and then there's worst case scenario. If you're in the most likely worst case scenario, we could see the Dow down 50% from its high. So maybe
how much is bread?
So probably 20+% up from where we are today. So again, I don't think we're in that depression, but obviously it's increased
What's
a
the difference
ton.
between a depression and a recession?
Depends on who you ask. We used to think that the definition of a recession, what we were taught in business school, was consecutive quarters of negative growth, which we have had. But then the government is, what's the line from the George Orwell thing is, the last thing the party will tell you is to not trust your eyes and your education and trust what the party tells you. Now they're saying that's not a recession. There's other components
so technically,
to it. We're in a recession, yes.
Okay, but what's a depression?
So I think in my mind a depression is like negative 10% GDP. I think it's involved in the definition of it.
Falling by 10% or negative
GDP,
10%?
Negative 10%, yeah, quarter. But the reality of it is,
and also the unemployment rate is probably well into the double digits, so something 20+%.
And then there's rapid deflation too, because people don't have money to buy anything.
The other thing in terms of the rapid inflation, because I've seen that before, it's something on the rate, and I could look it up for but it's something like it's up 50% like every week.
Sure.
I mean, we're talking about
it's Venezuela.
Yeah, that is the model.
And that's a currency crisis, and that's the worst possible thing, is when your currency starts to fall.
I think that's a given. I mean, how much does interest rate have to go up before we can't afford the debt? You can't afford just the interest on the debt.
So that's a great question. I mean, the reality is, as we've talked about before, most of the debt has a 5 to 6 year financing period, which means 20% of it is turning over every year. For every 1 percentage point that the government has to pay in terms of financing costs, it's not 1-to-1 to the Fed rate, but that's another $300 billion. So if we're starting to talk about 6 or 7% interest rates over a period of time, that could be $1 trillion in terms of interest service on our debt for stuff we've already bought.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the real life stuff. Gas. I mean, are we going to be able to afford? I mean, I think they're trying to price it out. Are we going to be able to afford gas?
Well, that's a campaign promise. They told us that they were going to get rid of fossil fuels, and this is happening too. I don't understand why they don't lean into it. Well, maybe because they'd lose elections if they did. But the fact that they're selling the Strategic Petroleum Reserve right now, when crude has come down. It's come down because of demand destruction, like you said. Yeah. It come down also because there was too many people who were long crude in the speculative market. But and I don't know when they're going to start replenishing the SPR. I jokingly say, if I had to guess, I'd say November 9th at 8 a.m. But that's just a rough guess as to when to start to replenish the SPR.
Give or take, right?
Give or take a couple minutes, yeah. Right. But the reality of it is that when they start buying gas back to fill the SPR, which is completely ridiculous that they let it drain out, for the reasons that they did. It's supposed to be there in case of emergency. You mentioned a war, things like that. That's why it's there. I mean, we fought wars. Yeah,
hurricanes.
We fought wars over oil and rubber in World War II. Right. So this is a pretty bad spot.
And I think we also have to think about long-term policy, because we're kind of talking about what's happening over the next year or two. But the fact that we are not investing in fossil fuels, and this is happening on a worldwide basis, means that at some point we may have rationing here in the U.S. on an ongoing basis. So you as the consumer may not be able to drive one day a week. You may not be able to run your computer one day a week. I mean, the factories may not be able to be open one day a week, because that's the way that they're going to move around the rationing of energy. And then they're going to use that as an excuse to say, well, obviously, we need more green, instead of, we didn't invest in the supply of the lifeblood of human flourishing.
So this doesn't make any sense at all, because if you look at what petroleum makes, let me just show you this list real quick. Look at everything that petroleum makes. I mean, stuff that you never, ever think about. If you can't put your medicine in a tablet, if it has to go into a capsule, sorry, can't have it. Look at this list. I mean, it just keeps going and going and going.
There's actually 6,000 derivative products. 6,000 derivative products. Yes.
That is, so what are you thinking? By the way, everything, an ice cube tray, that's going to go through the roof, because if you just reduce it, it's going to cost more to get it. So every plastic thing that you have will be skyrocketing prices.
This bounces back to the incompetence versus sinister argument. It's unbelievable. We should be patting these people on the back. It's literally a life-saving commodity. And just last week, you saw, what's her name, who tried to bully the bank CEOs into not lending.
Warren? Elizabeth Warren?
No, the other one. One of the four, whatever.
Jayapal?
No, the one I think she's from Minnesota. It doesn't matter. Okay. But she tried to bully the bank CEOs into vowing that they wouldn't lend money. Bingo. That they wouldn't lend money to fossil fuel companies. And Jamie Dimon, who's my new hero for the moment, said, "Well, no, I won't agree to that. That'd be the road to hell to America." And of course, he's right. This is absolute insanity. It's a product. Try not having gas when you're trying to get to the hospital or medevac someone out. It's absolutely ridiculous that they want to vilify someone. And before you have a substitute for it, who would blow up that bridge before you build the second bridge to replace it? It's idiotic.
Never.
Yeah.
You'd never do that. You'd never say, hey, I know we have an artificial heart that's working for you right now, and it's really, it's stable and everything is fine. You live the rest of your life. But we have this new idea. So
it's not built yet.
We're going to throw this one away, and then we'll come up with something.
It's more of a concept.
Yeah.
It's a work in process, but it's going to be great.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be amazing.
I'm going to add something real quick, too. As a conservative, which I guess I am, they tell me I am, but conservation is a big deal. I want a clean environment.
Me too.
That's an amazing thing. I mean, if you ever want to know where the crossover is, go to a Ducks Unlimited meeting. There's plenty of conservative hunters who want clean stuff.
So what does the average person do? Because I don't know where I've put some of my money in historic items and things that I think have value long term. But I don't have any idea. Does an old car have long-term value? I wouldn't buy an old Mustang now. Who's going to have the gas?
Right. Yeah, so I think that people, it's the wrong time, in my opinion. I just tell people what I would do, to sell out of all your longer-term holdings now, just because the perfect time to panic was at 8 months ago. So it's silly to chase this stuff. But I think people do have to.
So you'd stay in the market if you're at
I'm
this
going
time?
to stay in the market for my long-term stuff. I've traded certain accounts, but I'm not going to rebalance my long-term stuff. But what I was going to say is people are maxing out credit cards and running up debt. People have to change behaviors, too, because people think inflation is going away. If inflation goes away, that doesn't mean the prices come down. What that means is the rate of change stops going higher. And people don't seem to be understanding that. I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, I think that the important thing is you have to basically prepare for different scenarios, because there are so many different pieces going on, and any one of them could have a ripple effect, whether it's monetary policy, whether it's international issues, gas war. So I think you have to be doing a lot of different things, and I think you have to be doing different things for short-term prep versus long-term prep. So in the short term, like Jim was alluding to, you have to have some austerity, and you have to beef up your emergency funds. You cannot necessarily count on the jobs being there. You can't count on the inflation not continuing to go up. So you really do need that level of austerity. If you do have a company that has a 401k match, max that out, because that's like basically doubling your money. You have to do that. And then just kind of sit tight, gather money, gather your dry powder, because I don't think we're done with the pain in the market yet.
Oh, no.
So when you're at that point, and when you see the people with the money starting to deploy it, that's when you're going to want it to start getting aggressive, and you want to be able to have built up something to do that. I think long term, in terms of what could happen with war and the dollar, that's where we're thinking about the hard assets. That's where we're thinking
what's your
about
house worth?
Physical gold. You're thinking about real estate, water, land, those kinds of things. The housing question, the one thing that we do, and I hate to say it's a benefit, but it's a benefit if you own a house, is we have massive undersupply of housing. There's not enough.
Except the big houses, the boomers, are going to start dying off, and the younger generation doesn't like those houses.
Well, they don't like them because they can't afford them, in part, right? So they've convinced themselves that, I want to live this mobile lifestyle because I can't either afford the house, or today I not only can't afford the house, but I can't afford the mortgage rate.
Right.
But as they age up, and also, not illegal, but legal immigration policy, if they start building that back up again in order to be able to fix the labor market issues that we have, we need a place to put those people. So you have all these different things. I think that owning things that are tangible is your best road to wealth creation, but you do need to have sort of these different plans in mind.
Okay, back in just a minute. All right, lots of important things in your everyday life it's a good idea to worry about. I mean, who doesn't like to worry? What, me worry? Let me add another one to your list, because I know you don't have anything. You're like, what? I got it. My life is totally great. Okay, how about what happens if somebody steals your house? What? We had an FBI agent come in, and he showed me how easy it was to steal the title of my house. And I have attorneys, and I buried everything under, I'm not going to tell you because then you'll steal my house. Anyway, he came in and he said, yours was the easiest to steal. And I'm like, what? I have crappy attorneys. Anyway, it's not hard to steal somebody's house and take the title and switch it over. This may have already happened. This is the fastest growing crime in America, according to the FBI. There's one company that can protect it, and one company that right now will give you, I think it's $100 value, just to check your address and see if somebody's already taken your title. HomeTitleLock.com. It's HomeTitleLock.com. Make sure you use the promo code RADIO. Okay. This is my worst case scenario that I think is likely to happen, and that is a currency collapse. Because I've talked to people for 20 years saying you can't keep printing the money and running up debt like this. At some point it breaks. I don't know when. And everybody says the same thing to me. Glenn, the dollar is the strongest in the world. And I keep saying to them, you're assuming no one will come up with a better idea. And we're seeing China do it. We're seeing Russia do it. We're seeing Bitcoin do it. I mean, right now, the government is shutting the doors on cryptocurrency like crazy for a reason. Right?
Of course they are.
Yes.
I can't believe they let it get to where it did get, if it's cutting into their game. But what you mentioned, the currency crisis, I've had this argument so many times. People are like, well, the dollar's strong. The dollar's not strong. The dollar's strong if you measure it against the euro, the pound, the yen. Because
and those are all crap. We're the floatiest piece of poop in the toilet bowl.
Skinniest kid of that camp.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Because if you start to measure it against real things like loaf of bread and chicken wings, we know that the dollar's weak. And once they reverse course, which we just seen the Bank of England reverse course on their supposed, being strong, being hawkish to support their currency. As soon as we see that happen too, we could have a problem. And that's the worst, a hyperinflation scenario. When it happened in Venezuela, just to get it in people's head, the population of rats and feral cats in the city of Caracas went down considerably because they became a food source. When currency collapses, it's a bad thing. The Weimar Republic, Venezuela, I think in Argentina, Venezuela, they have it like every 10 years or something. Right?
Okay, so wait a minute. So a currency collapse. That's likely, I don't know when, but it's likely at some point to happen, isn't it?
Well, okay, in a long enough timeline. You go, yeah.
So I would say, so there are probably a couple of different currency collapse. I think that you might have like the euro or some of the global currencies collapse first.
Correct, yeah.
Because they need to pay for energy in dollars.
Right.
So with that balance, we're going to see that first. But at some point in time, given the fact that the government likes to spend, is not going to be austere, is not going to with the payments we have on our interest rate, they're just going to continue to print, and it's going to hit that point of no return, just like it happened with inflation. Remember, there was going to be no inflation until there was some. The same thing eventually is going to happen with the currency, which is why I talked about previously long-term wanting to have those hard assets like physical gold. The challenge is if we don't have a war to reset, which is usually the reset of things, then they're going to try and come up with an interim solution, and that may be where they're pushing this CBDC, central bank digital currency, as some sort of smoke and mirrors fix to this whole thing. which is really scary because it gives them more control of currency. It merges
absolute control.
And social credit can be built in, and then all of a sudden it completely changes the tenor of freedom in America.
I think that the central bank digital currency is one of the biggest concerns I have. And they always joke about never let a good crisis go to waste. And what that means, people laugh about it, but it's like let the shroud of chaos, let them take powers that they otherwise couldn't have taken. It's not funny when they laugh about this. And the central bank digital currency, if you don't think they're going to start monitoring how much meat you eat or how much you do with certain different things that they deem as not, or who you donate to, and it happened already. They started freezing bank accounts in Canada for donating to the trucker strike. So we've seen it around the world, how nefarious it can be for any sort of digital currency and the government oversight of spending. It's a terrible thing, and I think people are sleeping on it quite a bit. I don't think they know how bad it is.
How long do you think that has? Well, first of all, do you have Bitcoin now? Is that over? What?
No, I have Bitcoin.
So I don't have Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We can talk about why or why not.
Well, I didn't even understand it when I started buying it, but I understand that these guys think it's a bet against fiat currencies and the stewardship of money around the world. And I'm like, okay, sign me up for that. Because I do think, and I don't know if it's the answer at all. I'm not one of these lunatic diamond hand hodlers or whatever they are. Sorry to the lunatics out there who are listening, but I have it, and I hope I never need it because I hope our currency doesn't collapse.
Yeah, I'm old school, so I've gone in the physical gold as a counterbalance for the fiat currency.
Where do you keep it? In a safe? At home?
I'm not telling you.
What's your mother's maiden name?
I'm not telling you where we keep it. I bury it with Glenn's title. But from my standpoint, I just think that the control of the government and their desire to keep power, and that they have militaries, and you just said they're cracking down on crypto for a reason. The idea that they're going to let this end up working, it's just too much of a leap for me personally. It is an alternative asset.
So why did you say, when you first started talking about it, you said an interim step might be a central bank digital currency? Why would that be an interim? Because that seems, if they implement that and everybody's on, there's no way out now.
So I think it comes about in steps. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to bring it about and say, oh, we're not going to do it retail facing. We're going to use it on the back end to settle between banks. You don't have to worry about it, Glenn. You're never going to see it. And that's going to be the first phase of it. And then they're going to say, well, it's going to be a hybrid. We'll use it to settle, but if you want to use it, like they tried to get the Chinese people to use it during the Olympics and nobody wanted it, they'll try to do that, and then eventually it will become sort of this de facto currency. So it's not an all-at-once proposition, most likely, but then again, something like a crisis could happen, and they just may go, well, we have it in development. And they could sell it in very nefarious ways. They could say, we'll give you $2 for every one of your dollars. Doesn't that seem like a good trade? And then everyone takes that, and all of a sudden everybody's money's worth 50%.
Of course it will be.
You turn your money in, you get $5 for every $1 right now in cryptocurrency. And by the way, in 6 months, it'll be $3, and in 6 months from there, it will be nothing.
Right.
So turn it in right now, and people will absolutely do it. And they control you because isn't this the only way out of modern monetary theory, which we're absolutely doing?
Of course
right?
we are.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is the only way out because the whole theory is we can control inflation. Well, if you have a currency that I can say, you're not buying gas today, you're not going to buy any bread, and by the way, no currency will buy any bullets ever again. You control it all.
And if you don't think they will do that, anybody, they're out of their mind. And it's always small steps, to your point. Small steps like just 2 weeks to slow the curve. They don't, once they take power, they don't give it back, and that will absolutely happen.
So that's the problem. The way out of modern monetary theory or magic money tree is to go back to fiscal responsibility and to get these central planners out of manipulating the money supply. We absolutely have a window to do that. It just won't happen because that means the people in power have to give up their power. So that's not going to happen. In terms of if they get the BDC, it's not a way out of MMT because it will eventually collapse the economy.
Oh, yeah.
So,
it doesn't work.
Right.
It doesn't work.
One of the key principles of MMT is that when the government sees inflation, then they drag liquidity out of the system. Did they see inflation? Did they see it in the tech stocks? Did they see it in the real estate boom? Did they see it a year and a half ago when everybody like us was screaming at them there's inflation? And I don't know what this, and first there was no inflation, then it was transitory. So this is not something that they're good at. And obviously, it already has ended up in a disaster. I don't think we ever would have even considered locking down a highly leveraged economy if we didn't think in the back of our minds, I mean, those Einsteins, that there was MMT could bail us out and we could print our way out.
Here's the problem, Glenn, is that we don't have enough people who are protesting financial issues. You know, a lot of social issues get protests and people up in arms. The problem with the financial issues is usually the people who understand them are busy trying to make money or run around and hide their assets so they don't get completely blown up. And the people who are organizing, they don't understand this because it's been made opaque on purpose. They don't want you to understand this. We need more people calling, protesting, showing up at the Fed. Back in the 70s, this is what happened. You had car dealers sending keys of cars they couldn't sell to the Fed. You had home builders sending lumber pallets. Like, we need more people to get angry and to protest in a peaceful but forceful manner about financial issues.
I think you're right. Peaceful is critical, but I think they're doing a very good job at scaring people. Keeping you quiet.
Yeah.
Don't move or the FBI will be at your house. Don't move or you'll be on a list. I mean, that sounds pretty totalitarian to me, that direction. All right, back in a minute.
This is the right pace.
All right, let me tell you about Relief Factor. If you're one of the millions of Americans who suffer every day from pain, I mean, I just had a pain in my ass. And he's fine now. He didn't need anything for it. He's just totally fine. Relief Factor is great. I see testimonials every day of people who have gotten their life back. I know firsthand because it happened to me. I had my hands, I couldn't do this 5 years ago. I couldn't paint. And if you know anything about me, I paint now all the time. And that's thank you, Relief Factor. I want you to try it. If you have pain, 70% of the people who try it go on to order more. So maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't, but you'll know within 3 weeks. Try it for 3 weeks, $19.95. If it's working, you're seeing any improvement, stay on it. If it's not working, oh well, try the next thing. ReliefFactor.com. That's ReliefFactor.com. So my son just turned 18. He announced, I don't think I want to go to college. Now, his mother is like, gotta go to college. And I'm like, mainly because I don't want him twisted by what's happening in colleges. But I also think that there are skills you could get at a junior college or a trade school that I think are going to be much more valuable than another business degree. Do you agree with that?
I agree with it completely. The bar I own, the restaurant I own, 4:30, 5 o'clock every day, it's all filled with tradesmen. They become good friends of mine. They got a lot of dough, and they can't find people to help them. I don't know when it happened in this country that we started directing our young men away from these jobs that are great jobs. When the plumber walks into my bar, I buy him a drink. He's my hero. Because the time you need a plumber is usually on Christmas Eve or something. These are jobs that I can't do, and they make a ton of money. I think it's a ton of money.
I had a plumber at my house. He makes like $150,000 a year. And he's like, I'm about to retire. I cannot train anyone to do this.
This is ridiculous.
I'll give you another one. Pilots, if you like to fly, they cannot find enough major airline pilots. We're not going to be able to go anywhere because there aren't people who are trained at the appropriate level to fly the planes, and you've got more and more people who are aging out and retiring. So all of these the things that you cannot outsource to somebody else. You're not going to outsource your plumber. You're not going to outsource your electrician. You're not going to outsource your pilots.
I look at AI, what AI can do, an AI could come in and wire a new house, but it cannot trace a pipe. It can't go into an old house and do that. You know what I mean?
Not at all. Right.
When you have a nurse, you don't want, you're fine, take a pill. You know, even you can't fake the emotion. Nurses are critically important. And I just don't see us, I think we are completely changing in the next 10 years.
I think so too. And I think it's all it takes is to be pointed in the right path. And it's just, again, back to the tradesman part of it. It's somehow this notion that they were less than the college people, and it's not true.
Not true.
And if we can get that out of people's heads,
So give me some good news to end with on just on, advice or your best case scenario, most likely best case scenario.
So for me, this is going to be a long slog. People can't live the lives that they've become accustomed to. Like I mentioned before, credit card debt is skyrocketing. I think people still are trying to live the way they did. You can't. You have to practice some austerity. But now the good part, the one glimmer of hope, is that the American people aren't stupid and they want liberties back to them. And we have elections every 2 years. And again, I am not slightly into politics at all, but I'm into policy. And you have to start voting for people who have policies that are about returning liberties to people and not about taking power. So November 8th is going to be an enormous referendum on this stuff. And if it goes the way it should go, then I have a glimmer of hope, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, so absent some, crazy black swan event or a war, I think that we are not at the 9th inning. I don't think we're at the 7th inning in terms of our collapse of our empire. We're certainly, headed to the back half of the game, but we're not there yet. So if you go back to like the Great Recession financial crisis and what happened there, the Dow went from about 14,000 down to 7,000, and people panicked and they pulled their money, and then they missed it going from 7,000 to 36,000. Obviously, we've come back to about, 29 or 28, whatever it's today. But that's still
has a long way
double the high of the Great Recession financial crisis and 4 times the low. So you cannot panic. You have to look at what the wealthy and connected people are doing. They're taking a breather right now, but eventually they're going to start to deploy that capital. They're trying to shake you out. They're trying to let the people who are wealthy get the benefits of coming in. These boom and bust cycles benefit the wealthy because you panic, you go away, you leave your assets at low prices and they swoop them up. You need to adopt that mentality. And so, yes, prepare, but also be savvy and don't let them completely shake you out.
One of the things, I learned this from my grandparents. I think anybody who's my age, we grew up with grandparents who lived through the Great Depression.
Grandma washed paper plates in our house.
Oh,
yes.
We never bought new Christmas paper.
Yep.
My whole childhood, it was the same paper. Yep. Okay. They lived through that and they were really unflappable, but they were also exactly the opposite of what we are now. We are now wants. I want that. 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 They were all needs because they lived through that. And if I heard my grandparents say one more time, don't throw away that foil right now. Fold that back up, wash it and fold that back up. Grandma, there's plenty. There might be a time when there won't be any and you don't know what that's like. And you're like, oh my gosh, okay, I'll wash the foil. But that's where we have to be.
Oh, I think so too. I think so. It could be for the next 10 years that we have to think that way. The psychological fallout for this is going to be big, and it should be big. And I grew up 11 people in one home, and we lived a little differently than my kids lived over the last 25 years. So we have to start thinking differently and hope that the cavalry comes in from a policy standpoint to get us back on the track we need to be. Because there's another, because globally, like goods aren't crossing borders. You mentioned wars. Cheap labor is not coming across anymore, and things like that are starting to stop as well. So there's a lot of negative things, and it's going to take a long time.
I think that people are getting to the point to where you're like, because I know my wife, she will not buy anything China anymore. Yeah. Not anymore. She's like, no, I won't do it. She wants to see that it was made in America, and there are very few products that are made in America now. Yeah. But I think we're getting to that point to where people will say, you know what? I'll pay a little more if I know my medicine is coming from America. That we have some of these essentials. We were so stupid, and yet the people, I think, are done with globalism. I think the people are like, you know what, this isn't good. I don't mind trading with other countries, but we're America, we're Italy, you know what I mean? We have pride, and we should do some things here. And yet, I don't think any of the world leaders are there. They're going the opposite direction.
I agree. But I do, the trade part of it is a big deal because either goods cross borders or armies cross borders is the old axiom. But you can be a trader with the world and still be nationalist as well. There's no question about it. That's what we were and we should be.
Yeah. And I do think that you're starting to see some of these leaders create these new alliances and new different blocks. And I do think you're going to start to see those emerge. You know, there's a reason why, you know, India's being a little bit quiet and playing both sides. And, you know, Russia and China are talking about, you know, let's get rid of, you know, some of our treasuries, even like pre-war. You're going to see kind of more of these smaller blocks of alliances versus kind of this global, like, hey, everything's great, let's just have one world kind of thing. So even if there are the people who are pushing that agenda, there are leaders who are already going, yeah, that's not going to happen, and you can see the footprints of what they're doing.
Do you think, like with what happened in Italy, I mean, this is amazing to me. The guy she ran against, who is a liberal, and the former prime minister, he said, I don't know what the Western media is talking about. This is not fascism. She is not my friend. I ran against her. I disagree with her policies, but this is not fascism.
She wants to return liberties to the people. She'd be the worst fascist of all time.
Correct.
I'll tell you that. So yeah, I'm not. Does she speak a little too fiery for my taste? Sure. I would love a kind and gentle world, but we're not in a spot for that right now.
This is the Twitterification of everything. Everything that somebody doesn't like or agree with is ultra right wing, fascist, whatever. It's lost all meaning.
But does this? Is that a good sign? That, and can countries, if we had a regime change here, can we turn the corner, or are these things just so rock solid?
Well, they did. So Liz Truss and then Meloni in Italy. These are big steps. But what I worry about is if they continue painting her like she's unhinged and a fascist, that it almost can have the opposite effect here. I think that the tide is turning and the winds are blowing, to use every metaphor I can find. So I hope that the press doesn't effectively stop that.
Okay, let me bring back to my pessimism here. I think Europe is a powder keg, and despite the fact we have these like little glimmers of hope, I think that because of energy policy, the effect on food, what we saw in Sri Lanka, where you had the people go in and take over the houses of the leaders and like call for regime change and have unrest, like I think we're going to see that in Europe, and they're going to potentially end up dragging us into some sort of conflict that we don't want. So unfortunately, I don't think it's going to end up being a benefit that we're going to see follows from Europe over here. I think it's going to be, if something comes here from Europe, I don't think we're going to want it.
It's amazing that you mentioned
Well, I started the break saying, let's leave you with something happy. And then you showed up.
I know.
All right, back in a minute. I'm going to try one more time. Let's leave with a good, positive thought. I'd like to know, I said 20 years ago, chaos is the operative word when all this stuff hits. We're seeing it now. Everything's chaotic. Stay away from it. One sentence, one word, one mantra that everybody should think going into where we're going.
Strong family and local network.
Good.
Stay informed and avoid the fear they're trying to sell you.
Okay. I mean, it wasn't that hard. It wasn't that hard. I got news for you. It's like I talked to this guy who was a nuclear war expert, and he's like, you know, the surprising thing for most people is going to be they survive. And I'm like, oh, ick, I don't know. How do I run to ground zero? Anyway, we're all going to make it. We're going to make it through this. It's just, how do we do it? Do we remain American? Do we remain the good people that we've always been, or do we change? It's really up to us. Vote. We'll see you tomorrow on radio. From Dallas, good night, America.